This week's show brought to you by Gen 4 release in Pokemon Go. If it happens during the show, I will leave early. I'm not kidding. Hey, welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks Show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, and tomorrow the NBA is back, Brian. It's back. I think a little, startup team called the Warriors is playing. We're going to have to see how they do. So with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Say hey.
Oh, what's going on, Dre? I have been enjoying the preseason, but this is the real basketball. Yeah, 10-16 probably when most people are going to be listening to this show. That the NBA will be back.
So actually, Brian, it occurs to me, I'm going to throw an audible. So let's give I'm hoping this will be a short show. There's a running joke. I've never built this, Brian, but I've joked about a Boxscore Geeks Show drinking game. And so some fun entries on that list would be, for instance, every time Andres mentions he's from Wisconsin, take a shot. For what it's worth, my city of Appleton, Wisconsin, on a few lists showed up as the drunkest city in the U.S. What I'll stress is I think we're the most honest. We're the most honest city. They say, how much do you drink? They're like, yeah, we drink. There was a really fun study. The guy's dead now, and I forget his name, but I think he was in New Mexico or something, who studied landfills. And what's really cool about landfills is phone books actually make a really nice layered way of being able to cut through landfills, because you can take a slice through a landfill. You look for the phone books because everybody gets phone books at the same time and throws them away. No one uses them, but then you're able to go year by year. And he looked at things like liquor bottles, etc., fast food containers, and is like, holy cow, if we look at the surveys that say what people say they eat and drink and look at what they actually do, it is way out. So that's my hypothesis about Appleton. Other fun note about Appleton, we're on lists of best places to raise a kid. So there you go. All right. There you go. But so the drinking game, every time Wisconsin is mentioned, take a shot. Another one is every time I say I think it's going to be a short show and we talk for an hour and a half, take a shot. But with that in mind, I'm hoping this will be a short show just because we've talked a lot of projections, predictions, off-season stuff the last couple of weeks. So I think I'm kind of exhausted, even though I did actually write a post today, which we'll talk about. So we're going to talk a little bit of the NBA starting up. I'm going to throw an audible. The first topic I want to talk, Brian, is actually Luka Doncic. I hope that's
good.
I'll look it up. And then additionally, we're going to talk a little bit about one of the what's the correct term? Not like fathers. What would be a person that saw a thing and then told something? I'm trying to think of a good word for that.
A prophet.
Geez, that feels weird, but fine. Michael Lewis, a prophet of analytics.
Maybe a forefather.
Maybe. Well, I mean, he didn't. It sounds weird. Him and Malcolm Gladwell are in a very similar position, which is they're great storytellers, and I think they can.
They're journalists, right? They're not scientists.
Yeah, I think they can look at data and make and it is, by the way, it is Doncic. Okay, I'll try and remember that. But we're going to talk that. But yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about Michael Lewis too, and that should be our show. But so the audible, Brian, and I think you saw a little bit of this. I made a flippant tweet this week about Luka Doncic, and I said he's lame and overrated, and really he's not. The Mavericks really should be looking for an established veteran like Millsap. He'd do better for them. By the way, for what it's worth, we do often fall on the side of an established good player does trump an unknown rookie. So as an example, I think I saw some people asking, he's the best player on the Wizards, but not thought of as the best player. How am I forgetting his name so easily?
There's a few there. Well, there's John Wall. There's Otto Porter you might be thinking of. Now they have Dwight Howard.
Actually, it was Bradley Beal, which is funny.
No, Bradley Beal's not as good as those guys, is he? Maybe.
He's not, but so here's what was amusing. I think someone said, if this would be a rough one, but I think I'd take it. They're like Bradley Beal or Markelle Fultz. And Bradley Beal is an established veteran that's been above average the last two seasons. Markelle Fultz is a rookie you don't know anything about. And you can really make the argument that the 76ers, they are ready to go. So I would take an established player over an unknown rookie. That being said, Paul Millsap is past his prime, has been below average the past 2 or 3 seasons. So in this case, it's an easy one where obviously I'd rather have Luka Doncic than Paul Millsap, despite the fact, even adding to the fact, right, Luka is, according to Basketball Reference, he is going to be owed on average roughly $8 million a season over the next 4 years. It goes up. That's how rookie scales work, but it marginally goes up. He's $6.5 this year, $7.5 the year after that, and then he's got $8 million and $10 million on player options that, barring an injury, are going to get picked up. So in this case, obviously, I'd rather have Luka Doncic over Paul Millsap, and the reason being, let me just get a real GM up in front of me so I can and see if I can read some numbers, because I believe, first off, as Arturo has noted about Luka, he's won like the like EuroLeague MVP. It was really great there. What was I going to say? Real GM is one of my favorite sites in that it actually does have all numbers, if that makes any sense. So you can even look at international. But, he had really good numbers in EuroLeague, which you can look down. I wish we had like Boxscore Geeks for this or whatever. They have win shares. That's kind of cool. So he was worth 4.42 win shares in 33 games in Real Madrid in EuroLeague this season. So
sounds pretty good.
Per minute basis, pretty good. And then let's see if I can get it. So his preseason stats.
And we are showing right now the best of his 2018 NBA preseason.
Okay, so
let's pretty good in the highlights.
In 29.3 minutes, he got 15 points a game. That's shooting 43.5% from three. Actually, his free throw percentage was a little depressing, 63.5%. He got 5 rebounds again in per game. That's about 30 minutes. 1.5 steals, 1.25 blocks, only 1 personal foul. The one thing, this is what we always talk about with younger players, his turnovers were high, 3.25 turnovers. But essentially, for a small forward, shot amazingly well, rebounded well, needs to get his turnovers under control, but beyond that, looked amazing. So Luka Doncic in the preseason looked amazing. As Arturo, American Numbers on Twitter, if you don't follow him, definitely follow him, has noted, was, deemed the MVP of, I would probably put it third, because he said the best league outside of the NBA. I'd probably go NBA, NCAA, EuroLeague, if you're talking about talent dispersion where you want to look for. The NCAA obviously isn't as, I would say each team isn't as good as a EuroLeague team, but that's because, there are, I think we looked this up at one point, some in the hundreds of teams that are that are Div 1 NCAA teams with 64.
There's a lot of them. Yeah.
So there's more, basically you could condense all of the NCAA into a league as competitive as the EuroLeague. But, Arturo noted he's the best player in the most competitive league. I'm fine giving it that distinction outside of the NBA, and looked amazing preseason. And then, of course, let's throw out that term that we love so much, Brian, which I'm sure you're doing, the eye test.
Oh, yeah.
How you watch this kid do some of the stuff he does, some of the fast passes he does, some of the shots he makes. There was one joke, I think he took an off-balance jumper contested that went in, and it reminded me, did you ever see this? There was a Saturday Night Live sketch about a fake Dirk Nowitzki shooting school.
I have not seen that.
It's great, and so they had the kids put on a lopsided foot and then make noises like a goat. It was hilarious, but it reminded me of that. It reminded me of a Dirk shot, because Dirk Nowitzki is one of these amazing shooters, but he's also a 7-foot high guy. So if he looked off balance, he was definitely off balance. But Luka Doncic looked amazing, so I made these flippant tweets about that, and then finally I released a survey where I said Paul Millsap for Luka Doncic. Who says no? Classic. And then it was a trick question that people didn't realize, because I had 2 answers for Denver. I said Denver says no because Paul Millsap's too good. Denver says no because Luka Doncic is overrated. And the third option said Dallas, but then it said Dallas is just lucky Denver makes the offer. Twitter limits your character, so I had to be a little creative there. But basically, what I wanted to make certain was I am a huge Luka Doncic fan, and I'm falling into this. We're going to talk Michael Lewis and Moneyball in a bit. I'm pretty sure we were talking this, Brian, where I was noting that even Billy Beane, even the father of modern-day analytics, at least mainstream, would still fall prey to ignoring his own thoughts on analytics. So I'm going to tell you, rookies in general don't perform that great, even if they become great players. My 2 favorite examples, modern MVPs and Finals MVPs, Kevin Durant and LeBron James were subpar players their rookie season. I'm not saying it didn't become great. Same point. One of the players we keep bashing, and I'm sure is just gonna beat me up in the future. But Donovan Mitchell, not beat me up literally. I'm just saying I'm expecting something similar to what happened in the past, which is Russell Westbrook is a player we routinely bashed on the show, and to thank us, he turned into an MVP player that we agreed was an MVP player. And then we got to see, because this always happens as Batman. If you're the hero long enough, you stick around long enough to see yourself become the villain. Now Russell Westbrook's getting called overrated, and I'm in a hellscape world where I have to defend Russell Westbrook against people calling him overrated, despite the fact that I had years and years of people yelling at me for calling Russell Westbrook overrated. we're in the upside down world. But so I'm breaking some of my own advice where I'm going to say, even if I think Luka Doncic is going to become an amazing player, I wouldn't be that excited about him this season. But watching him preseason, it's hard not to be. So I'm a huge Luka Doncic fan, and my point was like the Nuggets, if they got rid of Paul Millsap for him, and the Nuggets, by the way, we can't do anything. We can't court Luka Doncic, but all I'm saying is it'd be a better fit, right? Because we've already got a complete team. Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, Will Barton, one of Mason Plumlee or Trey Lyles, and Nikola Jokic. That's a complete squad right there. You have Luka Doncic as your sixth man. That team's set to go. So I was making jokes about that, and people were taking it seriously. They were going like, why do you hate Luka Doncic? And I get it, by the way, because I'm the same person that bashes Donovan Mitchell, so I can understand people going, are you crazy? Are the numbers saying you should hate Luka Doncic? And the answer is no. I want that clear. The numbers and the eye test in this preseason say, holy cow, Luka Doncic looks amazing. As a Nuggets fan, I'm being flippant and saying I want him on the Nuggets sarcastically. Of course, as I've learned, and to the exact same point, Brian, I'm saying, you know the lesson, you know the analytics lesson, and you still fall prey to not listening to it. I know the analytics lesson of don't overhype rookies, and I'm overhyping a rookie. I know the Twitter lesson of sarcasm does not travel well on the internet, and yet I was still sarcastic on the internet. So I just wanted that clear, and I did want to give at least a partial segment to Luka Doncic. Amazing. A question, did he ever get back to you? I know you said you emailed Andrew Sutton a few times. Did Andrew Sutton agree, Luka Doncic for real?
We emailed a little about him. He sent some stats along. He loves him. So I haven't talked to him about it in a while, but Andrew is on board.
Andrew loves him. Arturo loves him. I love him. I mean, I think he's also in a great spot. If the Mavs, so let's jump into the first topic, even though it'll be a short one.
Well, just real fast on Doncic, on the eye test, watching him, I expected him to be skilled, but he has a really big body. If you see a guy who can pass like that and is that skilled and is going to play small forward, I mean, obviously this is a ridiculous comparison, but you said it earlier. Last guy I remember like that was LeBron James. Of course he's not going to get there, but who else, Dre, has that size of a body in that kind of a game? I can't remember anyone in a while.
And I mean, and that's kind of the key in getting excited. And so what I was going to say is, so I did release a Southwest preview today, and the Dallas Mavericks are on it. And what I noted is that the over-under for them is 36, and I think we've talked this. They were a 24-win team last season. They picked up DeAndre Jordan, who might be worth that on his own. One of the small issues is he does overlap with Salah Mejri, I think that's how you say it, and Dwight Powell. And so I think that does. Actually, am I wrong on that? What is Dwight Powell's position?
Dwight Powell has played power forward at times, but I have no idea what the Rockets' plan for him is next season.
So, I mean, basically, they do have a bunch of good players at center. They still need some backcourt players. They still have way too much money invested in Wesley Matthews and Harrison Barnes. But they were a 24-win team last season. They picked up a great player in DeAndre Jordan. They picked up a fantastic rookie in Luka Doncic. And we also know last year they were tanking. And I mean, they even admitted this. They went out of their way to say they were doing this, so they only won 24 games. So
Mark Cuban got fined for saying they were tanking, didn't he?
For F's sake, he got fined so much relatively to what we see.
That's so stupid. I mean, okay, just a quick tangent, Dre, before you continue. Mark Cuban deserves all kinds of, bad press for what happened with the organization and Ussery and all that. Well deserved for all that, but for him to get fined, I've got to defend him a little on this. He has been like the least tanking owner over the years. Like he's always tried to win for the most part. And then he finally admits to doing for a few months what everyone does, and he gets fined. That's funny to me. But sorry, continue.
I mean, yeah, I don't have much more to say on that. So, yeah. but with that stated, so if they were slightly deflated because of that last season, I think they're in good shape. And then also, I'm hoping they've learned the lessons that we espouse, which is even one round of the playoffs is worth so much more than not for a variety of reasons. The two I'll give you. Although one, actually, I think they relate. So let's throw some stuff out here. So there are two revenue models, and actually, I really want to look at the second revenue model. I don't know how I'm going to have to bug Dave Bear about it because the sports landscape has changed. Because the old model, this is wages of wins. The first chapter was actually about elasticity of demand for basically attendance to sports games, and that was the old model. You made most of your money by people coming to your games from the gate. And the key point to that is that's pretty inelastic, meaning that fans love sports and they will just come to the game. And the key to the inelasticity is you want a winning squad. If you have a winning squad that has a history of winning, in basketball at least, fans don't give a damn about what happens. And like one of my favorite examples is the Lakers. The Lakers, they unexpectedly lost Magic. They lost Shaq in a contentious breakup, essentially, with Kobe. And after all that happens, Kobe starts winning again, and fans don't give a damn. That's one of the lessons we learned. So the gate was the old revenue model for teams. And the key to that was winning games. Now, what's important about, as I said, making the playoffs is, one, you get the revenue from people just coming to the playoff games. Two, by being a playoff team, you basically now have established fans that know your team has had history. We've also mentioned that, there's always an outside shot of an upset. This is, again, I throw out a lot of ideas. Another drinking game you could do is when Dre throws out a story idea that's been on the back burner for like 2 years, which may or may not happen one day. But one of the ones that's interesting to me is upsets in the playoffs. Because if you look at the hit rate, so Dave Barry has looked at this, essentially a top 3 draft pick in the NBA draft. So that's the cream of the crop if you're tanking. Has like a 50% chance of becoming, and this is the key, an above average NBA player in their first 4 years. That's horrible odds, right? That's a 50%. If you were the worst team in the NBA, you have a coin flip as to if you are going to get a productive NBA player from that pick. Whereas I think the odds in the playoffs, especially as you start ramping up to the 7th seed, to the 6th seed, to the 5th seed, the odds of an upset there are way higher because, for instance, there have been multiple 8 upsets number 1. The Spurs fell at least once. I know the freaking Warriors did it to the Mavericks at least once. The Chicago Bulls fell, right? So it's kind of like
the Nuggets beat the Supersonics.
Nuggets beat the Supersonics way back in the day. That was the old system, by the way.
That's a good point. It was only 5 games, right? That was the difference.
But to that point, when people are talking about long shots of tanking, you should also say the long shots of making the playoffs, because if you're realistic with yourself, it's not a good chance that you're going to beat superior teams. But if you look at the actual odds in history, they're probably better than hoping you're going to wind up with one of the greatest players ever in the NBA draft with a lottery pick, because that's the other thing. If you look at players like Giannis Antetokounmpo, Jimmy Butler, which is funny, Rudy Gobert, there's lots of talent to be found outside of the draft. So our strategy is always make the playoffs. There's an outside shot. You'll go far. You'll get more money from the gate. You'll get established fans. Now the new model that I want to talk about is the television contract. Essentially, television deals, both local and league wide. There's a multi-billion-dollar deal with ESPN at this point for the NBA, which is what ramped up everybody's salary over the next decade. If you compare the two, television is much higher. That being said, if you are a team that makes the playoffs, you are much more likely to get televised games and be able to sell your local television rights for more. So essentially, we're saying, even if you're what's called the treadmill of mediocrity, an 8th seed, a 7th seed in the playoffs, we think that's a much better place to be than to tank. So we think if the Mavericks are in the mid-30s, they're going to have much. We're hoping, right? We're hoping they're a well-run, smart team. Obviously, as you mentioned, this offseason, I got nothing there. It's a rough one. And I know we're tiptoeing around it. And I think what's unfortunate and a reality is the way the Mavericks handled it was PR-wise very effectively, because they basically said, we got rid of the person that was bad. We didn't know what we were doing, and that was a mistake on our part, and we can verify this.
Yeah, an independent investigation basically said that Cuban really didn't know a lot of this stuff. We don't know if that's true, but that's what the investigation said.
What you can take away from that, and I'm okay throwing this out there, is to keep this in mind about all NBA owners. Mark Cuban's got a picture of himself with the photo of the NBA trophy, and likes to give the image of himself being very invested in the team. And what I think is important to take away from that is he might be a very good spokesperson or cheerleader for the team. But that means, at least if we take what we learned this offseason at face value, which does seem to be the case and is the story they're going with, he is not as involved with the running of the team as the appearance he would give. And I think that's an important thing to remember. I think we've talked about this before, even with Daryl Morey. Any successful team at anything, sports, whatever, has a huge number of moving pieces, parts, things that go well for it. And as Americans, at least as Americans, it seems like this, we love to basically find a figurehead, a Steve Jobs, a Bill Gates, and say that person, they're the reason this thing is successful. And if you're realistic with yourself, you say it's way more complicated and interesting than that. So that's what Brooks did this offseason. But yeah, I think if they're on that treadmill path and they're a well-run organization and realize it makes more sense for them to go for the playoffs, I think they'll go for it. So I think especially if Luka Doncic, honestly, this will sound offensive, if he has a Donovan Mitchell rookie season where he's still looking at the ropes and is below average but is there, that's fine. So we'll see what happens. I'm very excited about it. Do you have any other teams you want to talk about? It one thing worth noting even on these previews is we did do a huge preview show a few weeks back. So let's just do one or two sentences. The Houston Rockets, this was interesting. I realized looking last year, they are super duper top heavy. That team really is Harden, CP3, Capella, which means the success of that team really does run on how healthy those three are. And the honest truth, anybody looking at the Rockets has to say, I don't know, because we have no idea how Melo's going to look. We have no idea which players are going to pick because, for instance, James Ennis is a really good player. There have been rumors that they're trying to trade for Jimmy Butler.
Yep.
Until we see what rotation of players that team rolls out and or if Morey has any moves up his sleeves, we don't know. I do think they're a runaway to win the Southwest Division just because no one else is close.
Yeah, 57 is a decent number for them. It's easy to see them winning 60. But like you said, if one of those big three players gets hurt, especially Chris Harden, Chris Paul at his age.
Chris Harden.
Yeah, Chris Harden. He's a super athlete with the powers of Harden and Paul combined. So yeah, it's anytime you see a big win total like that, you're like, do I want to take the injury chance?
Yeah, we've said that too, and Arturo's made this point, and a lot of models as well. As soon as you hit that 50-55 win range, each additional win gets into a weird territory, which, as you mentioned, involves a lot of things like health. Point margin. What's funny is, at least for the wins produced metric, which tries to evaluate players, it views point margin as essentially a linear model of wins. So how much you outscore your opponent by as being a linear model of how effective teams are. And that, by the way, is not a bad approximation, but the reality is it's more kind of bowed slightly because the edges are more, or actually it might be more kind of inverted, so like a U, where the edges, a really bad team or a great team, starts to break that model because you don't know, because you blow out opponents or you get blown out by a ton. So that's the problem. You're right. They're basically in a range. We talk a lot about this on the show where you kind of talk about the tools you use and you talk about their shortcomings. And essentially what we're saying is as soon as you get to a 55-plus win team, the models that we have start to break. And not like break majorly, just have cracks in them. And so I think you're right, where you're admitting it. You're saying they could easily get 60, they could easily get 50. They're in that range, so who knows?
Yeah, if they're healthy, I'd put a lot of money on that. But
yeah, betting on health, the unknown unknowns, I hate doing that. The Spurs, basically, the over-under at 42.5, I still give them the over, but that's really rough because they did lose DeJounte Murray, who I think last season was worth 6 to 7 wins. He's going to get a year older. They got rid of Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, so he was in shape to get more minutes. We've kind of talked this model that the Spurs, at least traditionally, have had, which is instead of getting a young player and saying, I'm going to put the weight of the world on your shoulders, they get a young player, they give them minutes, but they usually say, we're going to adapt you to our system. They even did this with Kawhi. And so what ends up happening is this young player gets ramped up, and then when they're ready, they either do one of two things. They either give him the reins to play a full role on the team. That's Kawhi. That's like Danny Green back in the day. With Thiago Splitter, what ended up happening is they shipped him out to get other players. So they do one of those two. So DeJounte Murray was in a spot to get the reins. And we thought that was great. We basically were like, oh, this is fantastic. Giving him some of Tony Parker's possessions, minutes, whatever, is going to help the team. Now you've got DeMar DeRozan. You've got Jakob Poeltl. I'm really excited about, to be honest.
It looks like they are going to start him, Dre, which is kind of interesting. We were liking him earlier, and they believe the hype.
Yeah, I mean, what was interesting when we were analyzing trades, and that this could turn out funny because if the secret sauce to this trade is Jakob Poeltl, then it may end up being the case. It may end up being the case that the Spurs win it, especially if Kawhi hops ship. So if Poeltl turns into a legit star, maybe Kawhi's injured, and then, maybe Kawhi does a Grant Hill, right, is injured and then goes to another team. Remember, Grant Hill got injured his last season with the Pistons. Went to the Orlando Magic, signed a huge contract, and then with the Magic, just was not good because he was injured, which is, I don't want to bash him for that, but that is just what happened.
Yeah, interestingly, years later, he came back and played with the Suns and was actually pretty good. It makes you think, what if he hadn't gotten hurt? So I don't know if this is true by advanced stats, but in mainstream popular opinion, it was thought that when Jordan was taking his break, that Grant Hill is the best player in the NBA now. This is before his injury.
He won. I love this stat about Grant Hill. Grant Hill got more All-Star votes one of those years, right? I think it was when Michael Jordan was coming back. He got more All-Star votes than Michael Jordan. There was a period in time, how good he was playing for the Pistons and what it looked like. I remember all the Sprite commercials. He was huge. He was set to take off. So it is a real, and then as you're noting, when we see what he did with Phoenix, essentially on half a leg, another player, this is baseball related, but like Mickey Mantle tore up his knee really early in his career, and he still went on to hit 500 home runs and stuff. So it's one of those where you go, holy cow, this guy had an amazing career. What could he have done if healthy? And, I think he was first ballot Hall of Fame.
Bo Jackson's always one we talk about, right? Cut short by injuries. We loved him. So on the Spurs, I was a little down on them compared to everyone else. And I understand I'm probably wrong. Just, I'm not trying to be controversial, but I just think they're too old. They can't depend on, Rudy Gay or any of those guys anymore. So
is all I was going to say.
So I liked their under even before the Murray injury. So after, I'm still on board with it.
So wrong, Brian.
I know I'm wrong. Everyone disagrees with me, but I'm sticking to it.
Well, you know what? If there's anything to do, I've been learning this off season. It is just an amusing one. So another fun off season story, Brian. So one of the first games the Utah Jazz played in the preseason was against an international team. I think it was an Australian team, and they destroyed them. But Donovan Mitchell shot poorly. So all I said is Jazz blowing out this team by 30 points. Donovan Mitchell has more shots than points. Love it. It's interesting because I've had years of Kobe fans, Melo fans, Lakers fans that I've had to deal with their hate because of taking controversial takes like Kobe Bryant is overrated. A majority of, it's funny. I've got a weird combination of Lakers bloggers that follow me and I interact with well, and then Lakers bloggers that have just blocked me. My favorite one, this isn't even a subtweet because I'm blocked, is a guy named Damran. And I insulted Kobe. He came back, he tweeted back at me and called me sad or pathetic or something. I got mad and called him out on that, and then he blocked me. So I consider that the weakest. I don't besmirch anybody for blocking. It's your Twitter feed. Do whatever you want. But I do consider that move cowardly. It's up there, too. I've seen people that do that where if you snipe at someone, if you make a comment or whatever at someone, a question, and then you block them before they can answer. So it's kind of one of those weird ones where I'm like, it's his choice. I'm not mad. And in fact, if someone that doesn't like me blocks me, it means they don't see my feed and I don't have to put up with them saying stupid stuff to me.
The clear lesson here, Dre, always lead with a subtweet.
Always lead with a subtweet. Perfect. But so with I'm trying to remember where I was with Lakers fans overrated. Oh yeah, Donovan Mitchell fans. They got really pissy, and I mean this has happened before. Another fun thing, which is called snitch tweeting, I believe.
I haven't heard about this.
Okay, so this is how it works. You, Brian, or me, Dre, we tweet something about somebody, and my general opinion is if you are in the mainstream, and weird as it sounds, I consider us that, right? I have a public blog where I. To thousands of people, I think we've had page views aggregately in the millions over all of our lifespan. But, if we look at monthly numbers, it's, hundreds of users, hundreds of regular users with thousands of views, and then, up to thousands of viewers, depending on if something catches the zeitgeist. If you're mainstream and people want to talk about you, and I don't actually feel bad if you don't include the person. In fact, I often think the right maneuver is not to include the person because, as I've known, I have close to 5,000 followers, even if you assume some number of them are bots or fake or whatever. that's thousands of people that follow me. Even if 10% of them or 1% of them wanted to respond every time I said something, that's hundreds of responses, tens of responses. It gets overwhelming. So I don't mind that. So snitch tweeting is if you talk about someone in the public view, like let's say I insult Aaron Rodgers. I say something like, oh my God, actually, I have no idea how he's playing, Brian. So just so you're aware, I stopped watching after the first couple of plays. But if I said something like, oh my God, Aaron Rodgers is really screwing up today, and someone CCs Aaron Rodgers and says at Aaron Rodgers so he can see what I said. And this has happened to me with Donovan Mitchell, where I say something about Donovan Mitchell, I explicitly don't tag him, and then someone does. That's called snitch tweeting, and people are like, that is a really cowardly and childish maneuver. And especially when it's someone famous where you're like, my goal was to comment on them because they are on the public eye. My goal was not to overwhelm them with stuff. I know we've talked with like Chris Ye about this, where maybe if the person says something about you, want to hear it. But I think the other important thing is as soon as you're a world famous athlete, that's millions of fans. If everybody that talks about you has to say something, do you remember the really bad Superman remake with Brandon with Roth? What was his name? It was the Bryan Singer remake of Superman.
No, I haven't seen any Supermans in a while.
Really? You did? Well, actually, I saw.
No Nick Cage even.
It was with Kevin. It was with Kevin.
In fact, Christopher Reeve, Dre. That was the last time I saw Superman.
Yeah,
Christopher Reeve.
it was Brandon Roth was playing Superman, and there's a scene in it where he's trying to explain to Lois Lane why he feels so weird, and he's like up in the stratosphere listening, and he can hear everybody. He can hear everybody's cries for help on Earth, and that's like the angst of the Superman, right? Because we were supposed to realize in that scene, because it was supposed to be a more thoughtful Superman, we're supposed to realize that Superman has to deal with the weight of the world constantly because he can hear everybody's cries for help. Same point, as soon as you're in the zeitgeist in the middle, and I'm not including, at this point I'm taking us out, but that I'm like, to hear.
You're saying if you were Donovan Mitchell.
Exactly. As soon as you're, and that's what people say. It's like, I didn't want to yell at them. I didn't want to be a rude person to them. I want to discuss them because they are a subject of something that we're all watching. I did not want to throw an insult at them. So that's called snitch tweeting, and people are against it. So I had a bunch of people do that with Donovan Mitchell, and then in the offseason, I made that one comment about it, and so many Jazz fans hopped on. And I think like SLC Dunk wanted, like, I forget if it was the Sports Illustrated or the True Hoop blog, whatever, commented. I did get to use a Jack Sparrow line where someone was just like, you're the most pathetic fan I've ever seen. And I just responded, I was like, but you have heard of me. So anyway, that's another off-season story of fun. I forget how we got there, Brian. I think I just compared Luka Doncic to Donovan Mitchell, saying it'd be okay, and then laughing at Utah Jazz fans. Let's see, more of this preview. I will say this, Brian, about the preview I put up with the Southwest Division. I am cautiously optimistic about the New Orleans Pelicans. I think they could legitimately follow in the path of the Chris Paul Hornets, or whatever they were at the time, Bobcats, whatever. I freaking hate New Orleans, Charlotte, that area so much. If you recall that in 2008, Chris Paul legitimately should have won the MVP. They had the same record as the Lakers. They made it to the conference finals before falling to the Lakers, but they were an amazing team. And this team has Anthony Davis. That's the key. He is arguably one of the, not arguably, so let's get this out. He is arguably the best player in the NBA. He is easily an MVP caliber player.
Yeah.
This team was a 48-win team last year, and I know one of the things that we thought about it, which is key, is they did lose Rajon Rondo and then midseason lose DeMarcus Cousins. But I looked it up. Both of those players only played about 1,700 minutes. They picked up Elfrid Payton. Now, Elfrid Payton looked bad in Phoenix, but Phoenix is such a cluster. I don't give that any merit. He's looked good before. Mm-hmm. They picked up Elfrid Payton. Was it Julius Randle from the Lakers they picked up as well?
Yeah, and then if you remember, they picked up Mirotic in the middle of last season, and that's when they started, playing better, replacing basically the injured Cousins with Mirotic. So yeah, that Randle, Mirotic, Davis front court is really interesting and really versatile.
And then additionally, Drew Holiday, right? This was the guy that years ago they traded for from the 76ers and has been injured and beat up. He looked healthy last season. So I mean, if you've got Payton, Drew Holiday, I don't know who they do at the wing, but then, as you mentioned, they have that front court of Mirotic, Randle, and Anthony Davis. I mean, I'd be honest, like, I wouldn't mind just especially with how versatile Anthony Davis is. And, if you look at basically Mirotic and Anthony Davis, Mirotic is the three-point shooter. Anthony Davis is amazing at defense, even on the perimeter. I just put out those three bigs. And I mean, that's actually an amazing, if healthy, right? That's always our caveat. If healthy, I could see that team being a contender. And it's one of those where I didn't give it a bunch of thought, right? I was telling you pre-show, Brian, Patrick hacked me. He hacked my brain. as I even know in the introduction, I know I hate this shit.
It's called social engineering in that case, Dre, not hacking.
Social engineering. But what I was going to say is, despite the fact that I've talked a ton about this offseason, by the way, hate doesn't mean you're not interested. Hate means emotion. If you have emotion, that means you can still do it. So when I say hate, I'm not saying I don't care about it. I'm apathetic. I don't talk about it. If I hate something, I have to talk about it a lot. In the offseason, I'm like, predictions are dumb. I hate looking at this. We were kind of talking where the frustrating part about this type of article is this type of article gets traffic. This type of article gets eyeballs. This type of article gets engagement, people talking. But my general thought of it is this article is very, what's the word? Doesn't last very long, temporary.
Ephemeral.
Ephemeral. Cool, perfect. As soon as the season starts, we're going to have injuries. We're going to have trades, have weird GM decisions that we don't understand, right? Where, some player that we think is great gets benched in lieu of some other player, and we're not going to know why. So all of our projections and our guesses don't mean anything. So Patrick was like, do you want to do some preseason, some division previews? But he just made a template. And I was explaining to you pre-show, if you put like basketball templates in front of me, I'm like, I got to fill it in. If someone's like, we're the best 5 power forwards, list them. I'm like, I got to answer that. And so Patrick did that, and I was like, damn it. So I filled it out really quick, and I'll probably make a couple more. So me and
I might have to also.
Yeah, so that's what ended up happening here. So I didn't do a deep dive. I didn't give a lot of analysis to the Pelicans, but just looking at their roster, I went, if healthy, and if they play the right players, and as we keep noting, those are two huge ifs, this team's a contender, it's an interesting thing to realize. Now, of course, they're in the West, which is a tough one. They're in a division. They're probably not going to win the division crown because they're in the same division as the Rockets. They're in a tough conference. They've got several teams to fight through, including the Lakers now. So I wouldn't bet on it. Even there are great teams, the Dallas Mavericks of old, we've talked a lot about. Great teams that in many years would have been a title team that just didn't win the title because it's a rough place to be. But I'm excited about the Pelicans, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I want to get excited about them because of everything you said, but it feels like too many ifs to me. And Drew Holiday's a big one. He had a career year last year, and you're right. Injuries were a big part of it in the past. So maybe if he can stay healthy, he can repeat that. But just because we've never really seen it before, I question that. And like you said, maybe Randall won't pan out. He's looked really good at times. He could probably, maybe he can play really well with these guys. Maybe he won't. Just too many questions for me and not enough depth. Depth doesn't matter as much in the playoffs, but for the regular season, which is what we're talking about here, it does. And I question their bench as well.
I talked about this before. Like the phrase I would use is like, I'm not going to bet on it, but I'd root for it. So I'm rooting for it, I'm not betting on it. So,
and here's the real thing. When it's Anthony Davis, who may be the best player in the NBA, it's really hard to doubt their win total when you have him involved.
Yeah, I mean he is legitimately great. I would love to see him actually get some more success. He did make the playoffs, I think, with the last 2 seasons, so I'm definitely down with that. Yeah, he's just amazing. Last team to talk. This one, the way I phrased it is I had a very Pavlovian response to this. I think the under is an easy take on the Memphis Grizzlies. The over-under is 33.5. They lost enough. They picked up some good players. Like we really do like Kyle Anderson as we heard from the Spurs.
And also Javon Carter. I know he's a rookie. He'll probably be bad, but just a quick note on him. He was like a top 10, top 5 kind of college production player who went low in the draft. So he's someone to look out for.
But the slight difference, like for instance, comparing that to the Mavericks, a slight difference there is they also, they lost, for instance, like Tyreek Evans. They like James Ennis. They lost some good players. So I mean, team, first off, the differences I'll say is like the Mavericks were a mid-20s team that added a player. If you talk like marginal wins, I would say DeAndre Jordan is easily worth a marginal 10 wins. So what that means, right, is if you look at DeAndre Jordan's total wins, it's like 20. When I mean marginal, I'm like if you're talking replacing other players and minutes he can be a plus 10 wins even if he's worth 20 wins to the team because obviously that team didn't play no center last season. So I think that, DeAndre Jordan is a marginal 10 wins. You get some aging or health like Harrison Barnes regresses. Luka Doncic has a good season. I think the Mavericks are easily start to get to that 40s range. And once you're at that 40s range, you're going to want to compete for a playoff spot. Whereas with the Memphis Grizzlies, I don't think they're going to get above that 30 spot. And as soon as you have a team with an over-under in the low 30s and you think they're below that, I made a joke. I called it, this is from Robin Lopez, I believe, military artillery. Someone said, what is your team tanking? He said, I don't know anything about military artillery. At that point, if a team is bad, it's easier to bet the under because as soon as they hit the All-Star break and there's no shot of making the playoffs, and for what it's worth, I can't fault this model. This is the annoying one. I hate tanking. And by tanking, and what I mean by tanking for most people is when they're like, the 76ers model. You have to just blow up a season to get a high draft pick to have a chance at getting a star. I hate that model. Now, I've said this before, broken record time, take a shot because it's me justifying the love-hate relationship we have with Sam Hinkie. I didn't like that plan, but I understand that was the plan he had, and he stuck to it, and he did it very well. I think we've said that point before, in bashing players that are bad at offense, and the response is, well, they're bad at offense because that's the scheme he's in. It's like, well, I don't really have a retort for they're bad at offense because the plan was for them to be bad. So I think it's a bad plan, but there we go. But the other form of tanking is if you know you're not going to make the playoffs, is there any reason not to give up on the season, especially if your team isn't good? Because there's there are two types of teams that, tank, kind of. Where one type of team, if they wanted to win, so like let's say the Phoenix Suns last season, they got the number one pick in the draft. I think if they had really, really tried and put their minds to it and buckled down and tried as hard as they could be a 30-win team. They were a low 20s team, right? I think mid somewhere in that, if I'm not mistaken. I'm trying to remember last year. I'll look it up. But yeah, so it's like if they really, really tried, they could be a 30-something win team. And yeah, so they were a 21-win squad. Maybe if they really tried, really buckled down, they're a 28 to 30-win squad. Are those 7 extra wins really worth it? Because that was something, in Wages of Wins, what he looked up is more wins equals more gate. I don't know if a 28-win team versus a 21-win team is marginally worth it enough to actually get a better draft pick. And some other advantages of tanking can be resting your stars. Because a star player is supposed to get, 32 to 40 minutes a night. And we know that takes a toll on them. And it's funny, Brian, you talked like a Twitter thread. I'm not going to get into it too much, but we were talking Kevin Durant versus Kevin Garnett versus Tim Duncan. And the person basically was noting that Kevin Durant has more 20 wins produced season than Tim Duncan. And Arturo's response was defense. But I would also note that the Spurs started controlling Tim Duncan's minutes and saying, our goal is to keep you healthy for the playoffs and for future seasons. Our goal is not to just win now. And so if you're a tanking team after the All-Star break, is keeping your star healthy for next season? It was a freak accident, but DeJounte Murray got injured in the preseason. Every game a player plays is a risk of injury. Every extra minute is more wear and tear on their body. So if you tank, you can preserve your stars. I don't know if the marginal utility to a fan base of being a kind of crappy team versus a crappy team. Like, I don't know if being the Sacramento Kings instead of the Phoenix Suns is really worth the extra revenue it's going to get you, especially if you get a better draft pick, can rest your stars. Now, the failing we say teams have on draft picks, by the way, with that model is if you happen to luck into a better draft pick, move up 5 spots in the draft, trade down, take advantage of that high draft pick because a top 5 draft pick is worth more than the player you'll inevitably get. Case in point, Elfrid Payton was a top 10 draft pick. He was picked 10th. Years and years later, he was traded for a second-round pick. So our model is if you tank and manage to get a top 10 pick instead of a top 14, trade that top 10 pick. One of the easy tricks you can do is you can trade for future years, right? I trade you my first round this year for your first round next year and a late first round this year and maybe a productive player. So I think there definitely is something to it, and I think there's a good chance that the Memphis Grizzlies will be doing it. They'll be tanking at the end of the season.
Yeah, and this is kind of a common thing in gambling you're talking about, right, is teams tend to give up towards the end of the year. And I agree with you on the tanking. You never want to tank before the year, but when it gets down to the end, it might be worth it to tank, rest those dinged up players a little bit. I'm with you on Memphis Grizzlies. I've been doubting them for a long time, and they kind of just keep getting there. As much as I like Kyle Anderson, maybe Javon Carter, they did lose Tyreek Evans, who was really good last year. Well, they lost Brandon Wright, who never gets enough minutes, but is a really good player. So this could finally be the year that the wheels come off, and Las Vegas is saying that.
Finally, and we were lucky, but then it felt kind of bittersweet because part of that was Mike Conley got injured for the whole season. He was injured for 12 games. So it's like, I think we bet the under every year. We were finally right, and it was kind of like bittersweet because I was like, I didn't want to win that way, but
I have the same. So all these teams we're talking about here, they're kind of middle of the road, have the same problem, which is we feel there's a lot of up and coming teams in the West this year. As ridiculous as that sounds, Lakers, Utah Jazz, Oklahoma City. Although asterisk there, they have a ton of injuries.
Here, Oklahoma City and Utah are established good teams. Both of those teams were 48-win teams last year.
True.
That's with key injuries to major players. And we would argue there have been some aging to some young players on both of those teams. So Oklahoma City and Utah are legitimately 50-plus win teams. I think Portland, it got a little worse, but they're still a playoff team. We love the New Orleans Pelicans, as you said. Minnesota's is a dumpster fire, but Denver...
It's looking like Jimmy Butler might play there, though, Dre, and that's no matter how bad the chemistry or whatever is, a Jimmy Butler Minnesota team is legit in the playoffs, and without him, they aren't. That's how I feel off the top of my head.
But yeah, to your point, basically, out of the playoffs from last year, Denver, Lakers, and Dallas all look primed to basically at least be playoff teams. And
I agree.
The case, Dallas, the scary thing about all three of those teams, because this is a point we bring up routinely, is to be a contender in the NBA, you really need a top 10, top 15 player. That's just always been the case. Now, it might change, but it hasn't yet. And the scary part about Dallas, Los Angeles, and Denver is Nikola Jokic, LeBron James, DeAndre Jordan. They all have a top 10 player. You also have a top 10 player on the New Orleans Pelicans and Anthony Davis, top 10 player on the Utah Jazz, and Rudy Gobert, top 10 player on OKC and Russell Westbrook. So all of you're right. Like the West is really scary in that there are a lot of good teams, new up and coming teams, and a lot of star dispersion. Because even with I would say 2 stars and a good player each on Houston and Golden State, the rest of the West has a lot of talent too. So that's kind of scary.
You know who I think is going to suffer based on all that could be Portland. They do have that one guy in Lillard, but that's about it. They lost Ed Davis. They could plummet out of the playoffs.
And I mean that first round last year was pretty underwhelming. And so if they're the 4 through 8th seed, I think I wouldn't be rooting for them next season, or at least expecting anything. All right, let's get on to topic number 2, Brian. Actually, I'll give you last thoughts. Anything else to say on the Southwest Division or preseason NBA?
Oh, I was just going to talk about those 2 random contract extensions from today real fast before we get into Michael Lewis. Yeah, so two that happened today. One was Miles Turner with the Pacers. Am I getting this right? Yeah, Miles Turner with the Pacers. 4 years, $80 million, 20 a year. Not very big on that one. He's been kind of a mediocre overall player, like a big man that doesn't rebound that well, but he does block shots and plays a little defense. It seems like they're overpaying him just because he's a big man that's an average three-point shooter. And those players are valuable, but I don't know if they're valuable enough to pay $20 million. So I'm sketchy on that one.
It's not the best metric in the world, but we basically said if you're looking to be a 50-win squad, you take a player's wins, you divide it in half. You take a player's contract, you divide it in half. That's how many wins ideal world you'd like out of him. His best season so far was his second year in Indiana, where, as you noted, he was a above average but not great big, 6.5 wins. Last season he regressed a little. Below average player, 3 wins. I think I'm prone to agree with you. I think he falls. I've talked about this before. The LaMarcus Aldridge principle is what I've called it, which is this. To be fair, LaMarcus Aldridge in his 3 seasons with San Antonio has had 2 good years, but pre-San Antonio he was always below average in Portland for a big. But he would have some amazing games. He'd come out and have like a 50-point, 20 rebound game or something like that, and you're like, holy cow. And that would let you forget a lot about him. And more key, he was a scorer. So Miles Turner, I know, has had some, amazing games. I believe he's had some 20-20 games. And to your point, he is a decent, he is a decent shooter, 56.7. True shooting last season, 58.5 the season before it. As you know, he doesn't do much else. So I agree. He's overpaid. And then also, we've kind of noted this, which is funny. Yay points, that's Ethan Strauss named this. This is what makes contracts go round in the NBA. It's what people vote in All-Stars for. It's what teams pay for, which is points. There has been an issue, especially with the advent of Morey ball that's taking threes and layups, where if you're going to be an efficient shooter, and that's a valuable skill, you have to be a damned efficient shooter. So, I mean, we'll give a lot of credit, by the way, to Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan is a player from the past whose shooting numbers, even in the present, will look amazing, but a funny player. Two funny players, for instance, Allen Iverson and Kobe Bryant. Their shooting numbers historically in the modern NBA would look downright dreadful. So Miles Turner is a decent shooting big. He's above average. But the last season, as I think I quoted on the show a bunch of times, it was about 55.5% true shooting, league average. That's all positions. So he's moderately better than that, but he's not super amazing at scoring. And then, as you noted, he's below average on things like rebounds, blocks, and then high. He would foul out in a complete game. So I think I agree with you. The only out I give him is he's got LaMarcus Aldridge upside, and but that was not a good contract tag.
Yeah, because you don't want to pay for potential, right? You want guys with potential on your roster, but do you want like Harrison Barnes? You want to open up that wall for him? That didn't really work out. And here's the last thing on this. Just think about it from a Moneyball perspective. So a big that can shoot 3-pointers is great, right? 3-pointers are good, bigs are good. Like you just want good players like that in your team. But you know how much do you want to pay for it? It's better, I think, in today's NBA to pay for a big like DeAndre Jordan that can't shoot threes but just going to dominate down low, and then pay for wings that aren't as good at other things but can maybe shoot some threes. I think you're going to get more value doing it that way.
Chris was so as an example. Chris was noting this last week. We didn't really like Michael Beasley as an example, but Michael Beasley, as you pointed out, shoots over 40% from three, and they picked him up for I think a mid-level exception, like $4.5 million. If your goal is I need scorers, I much prefer the model you're talking about, which is get a really talented big like DeAndre Jordan, and then get a really cheap wing, and you put those two together, and they cost $25 million to $30 million.
Yeah, you get all the same stats or more for a better price.
Yeah, I think that is the key in how people evaluate what you pay for. And what we keep noticing is teams seem to love this idea of I really want to get scoring out of my four. I really want to pay for a four that can shoot threes. And we kind of go, if you're going to do that, they have to be amazing. They have to be Kevin Love, Ryan Anderson in his prime. It's kind of a shame what happened.
That's what they're hoping for here, right? They're hoping for Ryan Anderson.
But I don't think they'll get it. And then
nope.
And so the next contract by this is an easy counter. So who's the other player?
Oh yeah, Larry Nance Jr. We talked about him with Chris last week, of course, coincidentally. We talk about him all the time. 4 years, $45 million.
Really?
That's a little over $10 million a year. I was looking at the mid-level exception. Next year, it's going to be almost $9 million. So this is, throughout the length of this contract, it's going to be not much more than the mid-level exception for a guy who's playing like a star to superstar and is only 25 years old. This should be a really team-friendly contract.
So saying take that number, divide it in half. That's about 5 wins. His second season with Los Angeles as a reserve off the bench, 5.2 wins. Last season, between both his time with the Lakers and Cleveland, and by the way, this was in highly limited minutes. He's only played about 1,400 minutes last 2 seasons. He picked up 8 wins. Even if you expect some reversion, if he goes, if he drops because he gets more minutes, that's fine. I mean, I will give the Cavs between Larry Nance Jr. and Kevin Love, they got a pretty decent front court, and Tristan Thompson. It's just kind of like age and injury.
They could easily make the playoffs this year. I think their demise is greatly exaggerated.
I would love to see them make the playoffs, and there are lots of fun matchups that I would love to see there as well. I don't know if there are any other contracts or things to say. I've got a completely flippant one to
let's go on to topic number 2. I love this one.
So my son, Eric Carle, if you don't know, is the author of The Very Hungry Caterpillar, one of the most prolific kids books ever. He's written a bunch of other books like Brown Bear, Brown Where, What You See. Don't like that one as much. It's not as good as Very Hungry Caterpillar. But he has an ABC's book, A is for apple, or actually A is for ants, so in that book. But F is for frog, and I was reading this to my son today, and I got to the frog picture, and I was just looking at it. I was like, this reminds me of something, and it reminds me of LeBron James, the famous shot of him asking J.R. Smith what the hell when J.R. Smith dribbled the ball out instead of putting it back on and costing the Cavaliers game 1 of the finals this year. And they look the same. I'm sorry. Like LeBron James reminds me of the Eric Carle frog. So that was just funny to me. I did tag Eric Carle with that, so that'd be funny. But that's my off season. This is what I've been reduced to, Brian.
The frog is a little bit happier maybe, but in terms of the hand and arm gesture position, it is right on, I have to say.
All right. Let's get on to a slightly more serious topic now. I'm going to admit something, Brian, where I'd call this a failure on my part, which is I did just read the article. I didn't listen to the podcast. I've talked before about how when I criticize stuff, I do tend to like having had, done a deep dive. In this case, I'm kind of okay with it, but I'll try and listen to Michael Lewis's full interview at some point. But it did just sadden me a little because I'll tell you what, I want to see if I can look up a quote really quick, a counter quote. But if you read Michael Lewis's comment, because he basically says analytics has sucked the emotion out of baseball.
Yeah, I've got some quotes here on the script from this article from him if you want me to read those while you're looking that up. But yeah, he said it's drained baseball of emotion. What used to be a great source of drama was the manager coming out of the dugout, lifting third base and hurling it into the outfield, kicking dirt on the umpire. There's no point in doing that anymore. You raise your hand and say, "Can we review the videotape?" So yeah, that's the part that caught your attention and mine too. It's kind of ridiculous, and I've always been the opposite opinion of this. Like, I think the biggest example is college football, the polls and the BCS and all that. People saying, "Oh, we're using the computers instead of arguing about it." And I'm one of those people, especially when it's competitions and there's a lot of money on the line, I just want to get it right. So that's kind of a dumb thing to go after, is instant replay is what I think he's doing here. Like, instant replay drained baseball of emotion. Kind of ridiculous, Michael Lewis. And I don't think there's any more context you could get from listening to the whole interview. I think it stands by itself.
And you also bring up that at one point, and he's just like, and I'm sick of all these numbers being shown at me. I'm sick of seeing win probabilities and all this.
That was where I had some sympathy, right? That showing win probability in the middle of a game takes away, the mystery.
I mean, I don't care. But so where I'll basically go here, and I'll give a comparison to myself. So it's like the old man territory. There are some amazing video games coming out. So Spider-Man 4 came out for the PlayStation 4 and all the other systems, I'm sure, and I've heard great things about it. I did not go out and buy it. I don't have a PlayStation 4. I have a PlayStation 3, and that's because it has a Blu-ray player and lets me stream all the services I want. And in fact, when I do have time to play video games, is like geeky, I will like play emulators of Nintendo games, like Zelda 2. I've speedrun that a bunch. I like Mario Golf. I understand saying there is new stuff, and I'm used to this old stuff, and I prefer this old stuff because it's what I grew up to. It's what I'm used to, and I think that is a very common old person thing. I hate the millennial trope, millennials these days, because all it's really saying is young kids. And one of my favorite things is when smart people, the Cracked podcast has done this. I know Adam Conover of Adam Ruins Everything has done this. Is you can find quotes and you start reading them, and it basically says the youth these days are too interested in the abstract. They sit all day with their heads buried, and they don't pay attention to the world around them and don't know the real world. And you think, ha, those stupid millennials. And then you open it up, and it's the 1920s, and people are talking about paperback books or whatever. It's just kind of an old person thing, to be candid.
Yeah.
And I think, and again, one of the things that to get this is the political soapbox part of the show. The slogan that was run for in this election was "Make America Great," and it's essentially people saying, "I like how things used to be." That's really the crux of that argument. And Michael Lewis is basically saying this when he says baseball is getting ruined by analytics. What I'm fine with saying, I grew up with baseball a certain way, without seeing all of these extra stats and without teams using analytics instead of emotion to make decisions, and I liked that better because it's what I'm used to. I am 100% okay with that. Or, like a restaurant, you say, I like the old recipe better. What I'm not okay with is the opinion of you saying that has somehow ruined baseball. I hate the millennial. It's the millennials are ruining trope. And I fucking hate that, where people go, millennials are ruining this restaurant. It's like, no, they prefer something else. And that's just change. And what I would say is more important in this case with sports and other things too, that is progress. That's what annoys me, is when you hate progress because you're used to something else. Basically, it puts them on like the same train as a lot of the thinking that people voted in Trump with. And so I'm not a fan of that. And so the quote I have in response, this is a Richard Feynman quote, as I think it applies. And I may actually write this. I was debating writing this as an article today, Brian. And as I mentioned, Patrick, what did you say, socially engineered my brain to write a post instead. But he goes, I have a friend who's an artist and sometimes taken a view which I don't agree with very well. He'll hold up a flower and say, look how beautiful it is, and I'll agree. Then he says, I, as an artist, can see how beautiful this is, but you, as a scientist, take this all apart and it becomes a dull thing. And I think that he's kind of nutty. First of all, the beauty that he sees is available to other people, and me too, I believe. Although I may not be quite as refined aesthetically as he is, I can appreciate the beauty of a flower. At the same time, I can see much more than the flower than he sees. I could imagine the cells in there, the complicated actions inside, which also have a beauty. I mean, it's not just the beauty at this dimension, at 1 centimeter. There's also beauty at smaller dimensions, the inner structure, also the processes. The fact that the colors in the flower evolved in order to attract insects to pollinate it is interesting. It means that insects can see the color. It adds a question. Does this aesthetic sense also exist in lower forms? Why is it aesthetic? All kinds of interesting questions, which the science knowledge only adds to the excitement, the mystery, and the awe of the flower. It only adds. I don't understand how it subtracts. Boom. I love it. What's funny
Smart guy.
With a lot of the arguments I've gotten into with analytics, I mean, this is one of the common ones I do with a lot of, I don't know what you call like the 538 model, which we've noted is the daily model. If you have to constantly churn out content, it just cannot be as studied as it needs to be. And there's a Richard Feynman quote. He's talking about nutritionists, and he's actually saying, he's not saying that nutritionists with, new fad diets, and for the record, he was saying this in the 70s and 80s. He's not saying they're wrong. He's just saying, I don't believe that they have been able to put in the scientific work required for me to believe the outcome of these studies about what you're supposed to eat. And that's what we've said about a lot of like 538 or nylon calculus studies. We're like, this is interesting, but the amount of work and data, et cetera, you need for this to be a comprehensive study, we don't believe has been done. And I like this take from Richard Feynman too on like science removing things, math making things worth. I don't agree with that. The Michael Lewis point of analytics is ruining things because managers don't argue. Well, what we've done now is we've added new arguments. We've added new dimensions. The fact that we have arguments about if teams should be going for it on 4th down. Yesterday with the Chiefs versus the Patriots, there was this huge argument about if they should have gone for 2 versus 1 that was filling up my Twitter feed. The addition of knowledge does not diminish the subject itself. What it does do, that's the last metaphor I have to this point, Brian, is when you hear like old people saying like kids these days with their new slang, their new vernacular, that's kind of one of the annoying things about being old, right? You don't know what things mean because people come up with a new vocabulary and language to discuss things, and your choices are to either learn what it means or to be old and say young kids these days say stupid things. And so the same becomes true of sports. All of the analytics have added a new vocabulary, a new vernacular, which to enjoy the sport with what's being shown to you on television requires learning new things. And that's not the most fun. I hear you. I don't like learning new things either all the time. Sometimes it's frustrating and annoying. I'm like, this old thing worked perfectly fine. Why do I have to learn it? We've been complaining about Skype recently, Brian. We're like, the old version of Skype was fine. Why the heck did they change it? Now it makes everything harder. That's okay. But what I hate from that take, and I just want to nail this point one more time, is to say that makes it worse frustrates me. To say, I don't like this because I liked the old way is completely fine. To say the old way was better than the new way is such stupid thinking, and I'm so sick of it, in particular thanks to the election, in particular thanks to every damned article I have to see about millennials. I almost tweeted this week, but I'm a millennial, and I was having a discussion this week about the smartest way to basically save for college for my kid, and then what in-state schools they can go to where the credits transfer. And then I'm in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin actually apparently has a tuition they have a tuition exchange with Minnesota. So if your kids in Wisconsin or Minnesota, they can get in-state tuition if they go to the other. So, I was having these discussions. I'm a millennial. So this idea that millennials are these young kids that just care about avocado toast, you're just saying, I like things the way they used to be. And I am completely receptive to that line of thinking. I'm not receptive to when you then take that to the conclusion of that's because the old way was better.
Yeah, and I agree with all that. Here's the one place where I temper it, though. I'm suspicious of articles and journalism in general lately. A lot of people are, right? I'm suspicious of that millennials ruin everything trope, and that writers and editors will, if they're able to somehow spin into that they will go there right away and try to exploit for the page views of, millennials that are rightfully annoyed. So, for instance, Dre, this Michael Lewis Yahoo was the article. We read it on, but it was on some other podcast, right? So let's try to attribute it correctly here. But, it was on the Yahoo Finance podcast where this happened. So So they talked about that in this podcast. What else did they talk about? I had some of the quotes here. So he's bullish on the NBA compared to football and the MLB. It's become a global sport like soccer. The players once signed are totally in control. In a lot of ways, baseball and football players aren't. He talked about legalization of sports betting. He says it'll impact the value of the franchises. He also talks about the NCAA, that they should be ashamed. When he was working on the book, The Blind Side, he became outraged. So all this stuff happened in the podcast, right? But then, of course, where do they go on the headline? Just like you said, that trope. So, I think we do get exploited sometimes by those tropes.
I was going to say I will actually give him this, which does make it rough, because especially since I have made money like doing daily fantasy sports and stuff. He talks about not liking sports gambling, but I like the reason he gives, because what he says is it's gone from being a social taboo to being a way the government raises revenues. Essentially, it's a regressive tax line on improvement. This is an interesting one where, like a lot of things, like the lottery and then sports gambling, who knows how it's going to go, but obviously it's going to be taxed. What it's doing is what does happen a lot is you have poor people that basically gamble money. And here's what's frustrating when we talk about the United States, get on my soapbox one more time, pull out some Robert Reich, where we have income inequality. Another important part about income inequality is income mobility, basically meaning if you are a poor person, how easy is it for you to, the American dream, which is, again, when we're talking about getting manipulated, the American dream is a lot like what you were saying, millennials kill everything. It's a story that we've been told over and over again that when you actually investigate it has not been true for much, if not all of America, especially based on your ethnicity and gender, right? If you weren't a white male, the American dream was bullshit until, the 1960s, arguably. And then even then, there have been issues to it with money. And then we basically, since the 1980s, have seen rising income inequality with a lot of social nets being destroyed, with a lot of, tax breaks to the rich. So this thing isn't really true. There was like this brief sliver where it was maybe kind of a little true.
And also, just real fast, is narratives versus data, right? And this is making me think of offensive rebounds in the NBA. So, and I talk about this a lot, but people will say, oh, offensive rebounds are bad. No one crashes the glass anymore. It's just a bad strategy. And so you think based on that narrative that there's now 0 offensive rebounds in the NBA or some dramatic reduction, but it's not. It's just kind of slightly down, right? Or maybe significantly down. But it's not. But if it's harder to get them, then but they have the same value, maybe it's marginally more valuable when you're talking about Moneyball. So we get into all these, maybe millennials are eating, millions of avocados, but how many more? Just a few more probably, or they're buying less of some other product. Well, maybe it's just a few less. So it's not like it went from whatever it was before to 0, right? That's all. It's just a slight trend.
Okay, so it is interesting. So here is a point on the offensive rebounds. So to what you're saying, being down versus dead, and I think that's key. Last year, it was about 22.8% offensive rebound percent. And what that means is, of the opportunities to get an offensive rebound, 22.8% of the time, on average, league average, they got it. In 1980, which I consider the birth of the modern NBA, because that's the three-point line, the biggest stars, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, in the NBA, and post-ABA merger.
Also, turnovers are kept track of.
And that was, like I said, it's kind
of... That
of
was a year or two before, yeah.
Because it was 1978, we get the complete box score. 1980, we get the three-point line and the modern stars in the markets that require 33.5%. So you're right. Offensive rebounding from basically what I'd say beginning of modern era to now is down dramatically. 22.8% versus 33.5% is significantly lower. But as you point out, it's not dead. It's just down. And that's what's annoying. So when people say, this thing is not important anymore, it's funny to say it's not as important as it used to be, but it's still really, really important. And let's see. Yep. So, and also as a comparison, in 1980, the best team, the Houston Rockets, had a offensive rebounding chance of 37.6%. And the worst team, the Utah Jazz, 29.7%. So if you look at that, right, that is a range of about 8%. And so then, sorry, I didn't have these pages open as easy to me as I would have liked, so apologies.
Yeah, this is kind of a tangent, sorry, but we got there.
So last year, the Oklahoma City Thunder 27.7% offensive rebound percent chance. Lowest team, Dallas Mavericks, 18%. So that's a 9.7% gap. So that also gets funny where we get into marginalness, where it's going. When we talk about stats and we talk about players, and we were even saying that now when we were talking about how did I already forget his name? Miles Turner.
Yep.
Said you compare his scoring to league average, and he's just a little better. And so the point is, if the range for offensive rebound percent has gone up, the marginal value has actually gotten a little better.
Exactly. Marginal is the key word here.
And then also, as I mentioned, I've looked into this before, a huge change in the NBA, and this also affects offensive rebounding percentage chances. Teams just put the ball in the hoop a lot better.
Yep.
Let me see. So, yes, was a change. So last season, 52.1% effective field goal percentage. So what that means is, essentially, if you're looking at the number of shots, the percentage of points made on shots that go in, it's factoring in threes as well. I could have done field goal percentage as well. I should have just actually done field goal percent. 52.1%. 1980, 48.6%. So the reason there are a lot more, one of the reasons there were a lot more offensive rebounds in the 1980s is teams missed a lot more, so there were a lot more offensive rebounds to be had.
Yeah, and again, we're talking about Michael Lewis as a journalist, instead of a scientist. If all he wants is arguments, then they can just do that. They can go out in the field and argue about stuff other than instant replay. It's just a ridiculous. It makes no sense what he's trying to say. He is being a get off my lawn kind of guy.
To your point, though, and I forget if you already read this quote, but I'm going to repeat this quote.
Sure.
From him talking about the NCAA, because he said for The Blind Side, he got really upset. And by the way, I've seen the movie The Blind Side and read the book. The book's really good. And it's funny because, sometimes when there are these based on a true story movies, there's over-the-top stuff. And actually, The Blind Side's no different. Because, for instance, in the movie The Blind Side, one of the things they tried to do is kind of portray Michael Orr. It's actually quite frustrating, and the real world lady is kind of frustrating too. But they portrayed Michael Orr as kind of this dumb idiot that's just kind of really protective and has to learn how to play football and doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah, he's a left tackle. That's one of the smartest positions in football.
And yeah, and in real life, he's like, no, I know how to play fucking football.
Yeah.
But what this family did for him is, they helped him with getting his GPA up and finagling the system right, because he could take like summer classes that were college credit that were worth this. It's very frustrating actually to realize that essentially if you have a low GPA, if you had a bad freshman and sophomore year in high school and are an amazing athlete, the NCAA can basically just screw you forever, because that was what almost happened. And the amount of work this family had to do to get him into college was remarkable. And it's funny, I've been seeing a lot of tweets about this, and it's the same point. When you see a tweet that says something like, kid raises $15,000 with cookies for family's medical bills. And the way we spin this story, you're talking journalism, the way we spin the story is this amazing, triumphant story of this kid, instead of going, what the fuck is wrong with our healthcare system when a little kid raised $15,000? Or similar stories where like coworkers, all chip in time off so mother can, take an extra 2 months off after giving birth. You're like, that's not a triumphant story. That's a terrible story. So the same thing, The Blind Side, the book, is this triumphant story about how this rich, well-connected white family is able to push a talented, in the book, smart athlete into college, when really we should go, why the hell is the NCAA, this organization that's allegedly there to hopefully help students and maintain the sanctity of the sport, why the hell are they fighting so hard to get a poor black kid into school? And they do. And so what I was going to say about that point is, while The Blind Side, the movie, does have some over-the-top crap that isn't like the real world, one of the things they do is they have these villainous NCAA people that at one point, and it's like a verbatim line in the movie, where the NCAA official is like, can you imagine what would happen if a bunch of rich white families suddenly started siphoning talented young black people into college?
Man,
straight as the villain in the movie. And you might think that's over the top. That's in the book. And they did have legitimate conversation with the NCAA where the Tuohys were getting really upset. I believe that's their name. So to that point, the NCAA is this evil, horrendous organization that does stuff like that. They're going, can you believe giving poor black kids money? What will they think of next? And it's ridiculous. And I want to quote Michael Lewis on this, where he says, but for God's sakes, Don't erect this principled barrier between them and all these rich white guys in the stands who are interested in them for this brief little moment in their lives. I love it. So I will actually give you credit. Thank you very much, Brian, because I was like hurt. We did get fooled by the clickbaity headline. I was hurt that Michael Lewis, one of the first people to write about analytics, would have the "get off my lawn" stand. And I think what I will do kind of more politely is say, especially reading in context. So it's funny you said, you think I don't need to listen much more to get the context. The context, I think, is right, where he's saying you're ruining the sport. And that's the wrong language. But as long as, and with many people, we flip this to say, what you actually mean is you liked it better the way before. I'll give that to him. So he's wrong. I don't agree with that. But I'll say I'm willing to give him the out of saying I understand saying I like something better the way it used to be. And I fully give him his comments on the NBA, sports betting, and the NCAA. So you know what, Michael Lewis, that's 75 of the 4 highlighted comments in the Finance Yahoo article, 3 out of 4. That's 75%. True shooting, that's an amazing percentage. Baseball, you're one of the most amazing. So you know what, Michael Lewis, you still get to keep your cred.
That's fair. That's fair.
All right, Brian. Well, that is everything I had to say. I think, oh, yeah, that's rough. Yeah, you've got some shout-outs. I'll let you say those. They're great ones. I'll let you say that, and then that'll be our show.
Yeah, no, first one is Paul Allen passed away at 65. He's been battling cancer for a long time. I didn't realize that he was at this point, but yeah, he was the owner of the not just the Trailblazers, but also the Seattle Seahawks. And I didn't realize that he retired from Microsoft in 1983. So he's been doing the sports ownership thing for a long time. And yeah, cancer always wins, I guess. It's just brutal.
And for what it's worth, some like weird tangential stuff. We were just talking about how in America, we love to lionize one person. Bill Gates gets that. He was a huge deal in early Microsoft. And to the exact same problem with lionizing one person in organizations, he actually did have health problems. And in those health problems, apparently, from what I've heard, so I'll say allegedly just in case because I haven't researched this a ton, like Bill Gates basically used that as an excuse to try and basically get more power. So that's another problem when you start.
Oh, interesting.
One person in an organization, when you start lionizing Daryl Morey's or Mark Cuban's, it's like that person can have faults and flaws, and it's risky to do that.
Yeah. My second one is a little more direct basketball related. Someone who we've liked, I think, the last couple of years, I have personally anyway, is Todd Whitehead at Crumpled Jumper. One thing we say about 538 is they have, maybe questionable articles, but really good graphics. He has even better graphics in a lot of cases, and he's great illustrations too. But on top of that, I also like some of his analytics stuff, and this is no exception today. He's got a bunch of new stuff up on Tableau. One of them is frequency of play versus points for possession for 10 types of plays, ISO, post, etc. He's also got stuff like off screens and cuts. So I love this kind of data visualization. It was pretty interesting.
Awesome. I actually did throw one out because you did make me think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to throw out to Jonathan Weiler and the Agony of Defeat podcast. So Jonathan Weiler is one of our favorites. He briefly had a sports podcast, and I think right around the election, and then he released a book called Prius or Pickup that we're looking forward to reading about.
I've been reading it. It's good.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm about halfway through, because we talked this last week because we had Chris Yeh on the show. I'm about halfway through blitz scaling. I don't know if you'll appreciate this, Brian. I gave an alternative title to Chris on Twitter today. I said I think he should call it like Zerg Rush Your Way to Success.
Oh, yeah. That's pretty good.
Come on, you're a star. Nothing.
No, it's good. Well, the only reason I'm not laughing is I saw it already and laughed then.
Clearly, I'm pitching this to the StarCraft fan and it failed. So
no. I'm sorry. It's accurate because Zergs do blitzscale, right? They will sacrifice resources in order to get ahead.
All right. So anyway, so I told Chris that, but basically Chris and Jonathan both released a book on the same date, and then I had a busy week as it was. So I picked blitzscaling to go ahead with, like I said, I'm about halfway through. You pick up a Prius. So hopefully we'll be able to discuss that more in the future. But as I mentioned, Jonathan Weiler's and it's Matt Andrews. I was a huge fan of this podcast. It was actually, to make this about me, we've had Jonathan Weiler as a guest multiple times, and I've loved him as a guest. And what I had to admit is the synergy between him and Matt Andrews It's just absolutely fantastic. Far exceeded what I did as a host with Jonathan Weiler, and Jonathan Weiler is one of the sharpest minds out there. So, this is, it was a funny one where I was feeling bad I didn't have him on more as a guest because, it's just me being busy and absent-minded and goldfish-brained. And then when he had his own podcast, I was like, fantastic, because we need to hear you talk, and he is great. So it's called the Agony of Defeat podcast. This, Brian, sounds right up your wheelhouse because the way he phrases it is, it's on the intersection of sports, politics, and history. So if he manages to poach you as a producer, because we do pay you so much on this show, I wouldn't even do it. But no, it's a podcast right up our alley. Glad it's back. The first one is out. It's on the significance of the 1968 Olympics. I'm looking forward to listening to it on my watch.
I didn't know about it. I'm going to listen too.
Yeah, so I put it on the link. We'll put a link in the show notes. The show notes will probably come out Thursday, Brian, because we're going to be having season previews up and all that. But yeah, that's my shout out. Jonathan Weiler, Agony of Defeat podcast. Definitely give it a listen. And then a retroactive shout out to our guest last week, Chris Ye. The book Blitzscaling released last week on the 10th. Like I said, I'm halfway through it. Chris is an amazing author, so listen to it on Audible if you haven't. That sounds like a good number of shout outs, Brian. What do you think?
That's all I've got.
All right, I'll take us out of here, Chewy. Last question I got for you, Brian. Who do you got tomorrow? The Warriors, or who are they playing? Or actually, the Warriors aren't playing tomorrow.
They're playing tomorrow at 7:30 Pacific versus the Westbrook and Robertson-less Oklahoma City Thunder. Even Steven Adams is having some back problems, so it's looking like things are setting up nicely for the Warriors tomorrow.
So I'm calling a Warriors loss right now. How about it?
It could happen.
Who do you got between the 76ers and the Celtics?
I think they will tie in quadruple overtime, just like Tom Brady versus Mahomes.
You think they'll do the the Minnesota Vikings and the Packers did that. They had a tie game. Okay, so Brian's calling a tie from the Celtics or 76ers. We'll give you full credit if they go to OT, Brian. How's that sound?
Markelle Fultz quadruple double.
Oh, all right. Well, let's go out there. All right, so Markelle Fultz quadruple double. Yep. Brian says in jest. So if it happens for real, that'll be hilarious.
Sure.
If he does like a what's his name, Michael Kidd Gilchrist rookie triple double.
Right.
All right, so tune into that tomorrow. We'll see you next week. That's been our show. If you find us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live. I'm gonna tease it every time I do this, Brian. Add to the drinking game. Every time I say we have a regularly scheduled time, we're off the next 3 weeks. So 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Mondays, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. You can find the iTunes and Stitcher show, the Boxscore Geeks Show. Subscribe, upvote, it helps us out. And if you want to catch recaps of the live show, you can catch them on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Ray Alvarez. You can find me everywhere as Nerd Numbers. Co-host Brian Foster, you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. And with us in spirit, Patrick Mint, you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. Have a cookie and enjoy the NBA.